Let's talk about overthinking. I doubt there's a single human being on this planet that hasn't at one point in their life struggled with their thoughts. Maybe you're beating yourself up in your head. Maybe you feel a little out of place. Maybe you feel like you're not going to be able to pull off these goals that you've set for yourself. But regardless of the reasons you have to overthink, there's a really simple way to not do it. And here's my 5-step process to overcome overthinking. First, you need to understand where overthinking actually comes from. So let me share with you a quick story of something that happened that contributed a lot to my overthinking early in my career. So this happened on 4th of July when I was around 21 years old. And I had just dropped out of college because I wanted to pursue my dream of being a stand-up comedian. And I also had a job working at a gym selling gym memberships. And this was a pretty big decision that I had made to just stop going to college. To be fair, from my perspective, I wasn't even really doing well or paying attention in college anyway. So it was like a no-brainer for me. I just dropped out. It was no big deal. But everyone around me was very concerned, as you can imagine. And I went over to a friend's house for 4th of July. And you have to understand, this was my best friend growing up. His family was my second family. I used to go to his house every single weekend. We'd spend holidays together. I looked at his mom as my second mom, his dad, my second dad. We were very close because I was there so much. He lived right down the street from me. And I go over to their house for 4th of July, and his dad had found out that I had dropped out of college. So we're sitting in the backyard. He was barbecuing, we're talking, and he had a bit of a drinking problem. And he was a couple of drinks in. He wasn't totally sloppy drunk, but he was on his way. And he starts berating me about my decision to drop out of college. It was making me feel very uncomfortable. And then he asked me what my plan was. He said, "What's your plan? What are you gonna do? How are you gonna make money?" And the reality is, I wanted to be a comedian, but there weren't a lot of people who were super supportive of this creative endeavor around me. And I was a little embarrassed to bring that to the forefront of the conversation because I felt like he wouldn't fully understand that objective. And I wanted to create a story that could get me out of the conversation. So I told him that working at the gym, I'm starting as a salesperson. I could manage a sales team, maybe end up running the gym, and I could move up the corporate ladder that way. So I crafted some kind of story for myself, and whether that story could have been true or not, it was irrelevant. It really wasn't my goal, but I was just trying to satisfy him. So he throws his hands up and he goes,
"That's it? So you're gonna be a fucking loser?"
And that really triggered me. You know, I'm 21 years old. I just want to tell jokes on stage. I wasn't paying attention in school. I didn't feel like that was the right path for me. And here's somebody who I looked up to, really important figure to me. And he's calling me out, saying that I'm going to end up being a loser. So I saw red. And I said to him, "At least I won't be an alcoholic." He snapped. You want to talk about me getting triggered? He snapped. He jumped up and he lunged at me. So I got up out of the chair and I was prepared to fight him. And then I hear his mom, my buddy's mom, so his wife, screaming, "Stop, stop, stop." And that's my second mom. You know, I'm very close with this family. So I stop and I run. And I'm running through the house and I could hear him, footsteps, boom, 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 following me. I could hear things falling off of his tables. And I get out the front door and I'm running to my car. I have a 2012 Honda Civic. I jump in, I look back and I see him coming out of the front door of the house, his wife and his son pulling his shirt. His shirt's ripping from the front. Then I start my car. I'm panicking at this point. I put it in drive. I look back and I see him, his clothes finally rip. He falls forward, stumbles down the stairs to the front of the house, lands on the lawn, and I drive off. Really, really impactful for me early on. That experience was really impactful for me in the early part of my career. And overthinking, which I did a lot of, comes from experiences. Maybe you had a parent that only praised you when you were exceptional, when you got incredible grades. Or maybe you grew up in a single parent household where the parent you lived with would always talk negatively about the other parent. And then you started to think, gosh, if they're so bad, what am I? That's my parent. That's my other half. If they're a piece of shit, maybe I'm a piece of shit. Maybe you had a boyfriend or a girlfriend who left you because they didn't think you'd end up being successful enough. Or maybe you had a rough childhood. You felt like you had to walk on eggshells. If not, your parent would snap at you for anything. All of these experiences shape you and they cause you to overthink. So now we've talked about where overthinking comes from. Let's talk about why we actually overthink. So Remember my experience earlier with my best friend's dad. We know the where of overthinking comes from experiences. Now, the why comes from how those experiences shape us. We all have experiences. You and I may have experienced some things exactly the same, but how we respond to them is very different in how they shape us. The meaning we assign to those experiences can be completely different. If you've ever met two people who had very similar upbringings and maybe they were very rough, and one person is plagued by it and the other one used it as drive to get further in their life, you know what I'm talking about. It can be very similar, sometimes even the same experience, but the meanings we associate to those experiences completely change the impact they have on us. So for me, I already had this deep-rooted fear of failure from other experiences that happened before that one with my friend's dad. What that experience did was it really shined a light on it. And that's what got me so worried. That was a steep, dark thing that I held on to. I don't want to be a failure. I don't want to be a failure. I don't want to be a failure. And then someone said the quiet part out loud. And that really rattled me. You see, we all construct this ideal state life, this perfect life that we'd like to achieve. And when we feel like we're not making progress towards that ideal state, we suffer. But more importantly than that, when we feel like we're powerless to make that ideal state a reality, we suffer even more. If you overthink a lot, you have beliefs about what achievements are required to get to that ideal state, this fictional place you made up in your head. I have to do this, and this, just to get to that place. And then when these things, these achievements on the way to that dream state you've constructed are interfered with, are hard to achieve, it all starts playing in your head. Maybe you're afraid of failure. I'm gonna be a loser. Whatever it is for you. I'm not good enough. It plays in your head and you start overthinking, oh, I gotta do this and that because I need this achievement and then this achievement. And then your mind is racing with all of these things that you feel like you need to do. But you constructed that in your head and you made those achievements required when they may not be. You just assigned the meaning to those achievements and said those are required to achieve the life that I want. And you want that so bad, whether it's conscious, something you're thinking about all the time, or subconscious. You want this ideal fictional life so bad. You live in the pursuit of that while overthinking in the present. Because if you just do the right thing, just maybe, we'll earn the life that we really wanted. But you didn't consciously construct that ideal state. It was constructed for you. You were just foolish enough to believe it. So you have this fear. You've constructed this ideal life, or you had it constructed for you. You put all of these achievement requirements that must be true in order to achieve the life that you really want. And then you throw in some self-esteem issues on top of all of that. There's this little part of you that feels like you're not enough. Maybe your weight, maybe how you talk. Maybe you feel like people aren't perceiving you right. Maybe you're worried about how you will be perceived. So maybe all of these things kind of wrap into. Fear, ideal life, achievements required to achieve the ideal life, self-esteem issues, bundle all of those up together. Of course you're overthinking. There's too many cooks in the kitchen. And so that leads me to my third point here. You think that you should control outcomes. You think you should control the outcomes, and you don't. When I started my sales career, this was after the gym, I was cold calling. And the way that it was structured at the company was if you would hit your number for a certain amount of quarters, you get promoted. So all I had to do was hit my number for 3 quarters in a row, and then I would get promoted to account executive, which was a closing role where I'd make more money and it'd also be good trajectory in my career. And remember, I had that thing, I don't want to be a loser, I don't want to be a loser. I kept repeating it. I stopped doing comedy and I was totally focused on my career. I need to get promoted. I don't want to be a loser. If I fail at this, I'm screwed. I'll be like every other college dropout. This is what I believed at the time. So much so that I was drinking at least 4 Red Bulls a day. I used to come into the office, go immediately to the Red Bull refrigerator. It was a larger company. They just gave everybody Red Bulls all the time because they wanted their salespeople hyped up. I would go to the Red Bull refrigerator, open it up, and I would take 4 to 6 Red Bulls. I'd walk them over to my desk. I'd put them in my drawer because they would run out halfway through the day, and I didn't want to be without Red Bulls in the afternoon. So I was just drinking Red Bulls like crazy, and you'd always have a little backstock in there. Like a lot of the sales reps did this. And I mean, funny enough, sidebar, we discovered that 2 floors down on the engineering floor, they had Red Bulls, but the engineers didn't drink them nearly as much as the salespeople. So if we were in a pinch, we would go down 2 floors and take their Red Bulls. I was working myself to death. I was the first one coming in. I lived an hour away from the office. I commuted in on public transit. I would come in, all the lights would turn on as I opened the door, and I'd start cold calling. And then I'd leave late. I would take the bus, the public transit, the BART, back to where I lived while listening to cold call recordings. And I was working, all to hit my number. And I had a rough quarter. And it was looking like I wasn't gonna hit my number. But what does that mean if I didn't hit my number? It means I wouldn't get promoted, which means I was probably a loser, right? So I was panicking about this. I was calling as much as I can. I was freaking out. I was so panicked about it that one day I got up out of my cubicle, walked into the stairwell, hyperventilating. My heart rate was through the roof. I started crying. I was literally in the fetal position, crying, having a panic attack in the stairwell of the building because I was worried I wasn't gonna hit my quota. Do you realize how crazy that sounds? I look back at that and I see me, but I don't see me, if that makes sense. All of that suffering, that panic because of a quota. And you wanna know the crazy part? I hit my quota. I got promoted. And at one point in my life, I felt like that was required in order to hit the quota. I needed that drive. But I'm here to tell you that I didn't. And you don't either. I could have hit that quota without having a panic attack in the stairwell. I could hit my quota without all of the anxiety, without all of the overthinking. Whatever you're looking to achieve, you can do that without the anxiety, without the overthinking. But you need to step out of it, which we'll talk about in a minute. The real thing I want you to take away from this part of our conversation is that the things that you are stressed about don't actually matter. Let me tell you about something my dad taught me when I was in middle school. It's this concept of now what? So whatever happens, at a certain point you have to ask yourself, now what? What do we do next, right? So think about that for yourself. Whenever something bad has happened in your life, you've asked yourself, now what? And you have done something. And oftentimes, once there's a little distance between the bad event and where we are now, we look back at it as not as bad as when we were there doing it, right? So that now what is so powerful whenever you're in a place where you have a challenge or something that you just experienced that didn't go the way that you planned. You ask yourself, now what? Because it forces you to think of what you need to do next as opposed to reveling in what just happened. And the way that I think about it when I'm making a decision and I want to overthink about all of the different options that I could take, I take a step back and I say, okay, the outcome of this decision, if it goes poorly, now what? As long as I'm not homeless on the street, it's probably not that bad of an outcome. When I decided to start my company, I was very concerned because I was the only income earner for my family. I had 2 kids, I have 3 now. I had 2 kids at the time, and I was very worried. So I asked myself, let's say it all goes south and it doesn't work out. What's the now what? What would I do? Oh, I'd go make $300K a year as a VP of sales somewhere before commission. You know, it's like my worst case scenario is making multi-6 figures working at some tech company running their sales team. That's my worst case. I'm not on the street. I'll still be able to provide for my family. So why am I overthinking it so much? Just do the thing. If it doesn't work out, ask now what, and then do the next thing. It doesn't have to be that complicated. There's a cliche that says you can't control what happens to you. You can only control how you respond. I know it's a cliche, but a lot of you really need to start believing it because it's 100% true. And if you live your life in a way of, I can't control what happens, I can just control how I respond, these decisions wouldn't weigh you down as much, and it wouldn't be a situation where you would start overthinking nearly as much as you do today. Because the thoughts that you're having when you're overthinking, when you're worried, those emotions that come up, oh, what if I make the wrong choice? I'm here to tell you they're not real. Thoughts come from nowhere and they go to nowhere, and I'll prove that to you in a minute. Think about this. Have you ever had the experience where you're driving your car and you kind of zone out for a little bit? You're just staring off into the distance and you're driving. And you might have zoned out for a while and then you realize, oh my gosh, I'm like at my destination. So you just drove from point A to point B. You made turns. You didn't hit pedestrians. You stayed in the lines. You stopped at red lights. You made the turns that you needed to make while you were zoned out completely in la la land. Who was driving the car? Was it still you? You weren't even like thinking about it. You weren't like, oh, I gotta make this turn. Oh, red light coming up, I'm gonna stop. You were thinking about something completely different. Whatever's happening there was so powerful that it could operate a motor vehicle without your full attention and get you to where you wanna go. See, the meanings we give the thoughts are so interesting. It causes a lot of this suffering. It causes us to overthink. It causes us to feel pain. The meaning comes from the thoughts, which comes from the beliefs, all of which come from nothing. So here's an exercise. I want you just to sit there and really observe your thoughts. Give yourself some quiet time and just watch your thoughts. See how they come. See how they go. See how random they are. Thoughts just pop up in your head all the time. And then they just go away into nothing. What happened right before the thoughts? Nothing. What happened right after the thought? Nothing, until another thought comes up. They just come and they go. This leads me to my last point, where you'll have true freedom from the thoughts. You can think without feeling. Have you ever had the thought of like, I just want to strangle that person? And you're like, ooh, yeah, that's a bad thought. I shouldn't think like that. Did you really want to strangle that person? Are you a murderer? Probably not. We can have a thought of like, oh, I just want to hit him, and not actually hit him or be a person to hit him. These thoughts don't define us. These emotions that pop up out of nowhere and go to nowhere, they don't define us. They aren't who we are. But we're giving them so much credit and so much power over what we believe and how we interface with the world. And what I am encouraging you to do is start to disconnect yourself from those thoughts, from those emotions, and don't internalize them and don't identify with them nearly as much. Because as you identify to those thoughts, you start constructing an identity of, I'm like this is the type of person I am. That's where we start getting in these ego battles. So here's how I recommend that you do it. The first thing is, every time you have a thought or an emotion, don't identify with it, just observe it. The thought comes and it goes. The emotion comes and then it goes. That thought, that emotion, question it. Where did it come from? Why is it here? Is it coming from a belief? Is that belief even real? Why do I believe that? Where does this all come from? What experience is this tied to that's causing it to come up for me today? And then I'm going to ask you this. Are you going to let something that's not even real affect your happiness? Are you going to let that emotion, that thought that came out of nowhere, that's going to nowhere, are you going to let that fuck up your day? I wouldn't. So this is how you stop overthinking and being a slave to your mind. And if you want to learn how to conquer your fear of rejection, then watch this video and I'll see you there.